Welcome to the Travis Masterbone podcast. I am your host, Travis Masterbone, talking some shit to impact your life. This is episode 23, titled Jon and Porn. Quote, "Real pussy is all good, but I'm sorry, it is not as good as porn." End quote. Jon, the main character in the movie Jon, obviously, played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt. Scarlett Johansson is also in this movie, and Julianne Moore. Very good movie. And I stumbled upon this just through a clip on Instagram. It was a clip of Scarlett Johansson and our man Jon. Her name's Barbara in the movie, so it's Jon and Barbara having lunch, and it was just an interesting exchange, and them with some really intense Jersey accents. And it kind of caught my curiosity. It's a pretty old movie, 2013, I believe, and I never even heard of it. And I really do like these actors and actresses in the film. And I decided to take a gander. And at first, when you turn this movie on and watch it, it's just a very interesting role. You don't really see Mr. Levitt playing such a role as a douchebag. And that's basically how it starts off. It's this guy, Jon, who's just the epitome of a Jersey douchebag, out with his friends, partying, and you know the drill. You go out to drink, you go out to have sex, meet girls. And that was the main system that him and his friends had. Go out to the clubs, see a girl, bring her back home, sleep with her. And it was kind of corny at first, and I thought it was stupid. But then as the movie progressed, it actually became very philosophical to me and entertaining, interesting, and I was very intrigued. And overall, absolutely loved the movie. Highly recommend it. Watch it off Amazon. But yeah, take a look. We're going to go into it today, talk about our man Jon, his relationship with Barbara, a.k.a. Scarlett Johansson, and then dive into some of my perspectives on porn and how it relates to the film, how it affects Jon, and maybe it could tap into something you gentlemen out there might be suffering from, and maybe we can hit some key points and help people at the end of the day. That's the whole purpose of this podcast, is to maybe speak my mind, talk some shit, and maybe it influences you in a positive way. So again, let's take it to the film. Starts off with Jon and his boys going to the clubs and always sleeping with girls. He makes it clear that this is not a problem for him. And the only things he really cares about is his apartment, his car, his friends, his family, his girls, his church, which we'll get into, and his porn. And so you don't really see the addictive side of it yet. It doesn't really start to showcase itself until a little bit later in the film. But essentially, the whole entire premise of this movie is Jon and his porn addiction that he doesn't think is an addiction, how it actually, in a weird way, saved him from one relationship, and then he found himself in another with Julianne Moore. Her name is not coming to me right now. That's in the film, so we'll just call her Julianne Moore for the sake of this podcast episode. But overall, he is in this routine, in this system of just bagging girls from the club, and then as soon as he's done sleeping with them, sneaks out of the room and goes and watches porn. And right off the bat, at the beginning of the film, he is praising porn, how you get perfect tits, you get perfect shots, perfect ass, perfect women, and we should know by now that porn is artificial. These are actors, right? And I wanted to get deeper into some of the science, not too deep, and how it releases dopamine and how we set these expectations for our brain and program it to have a certain arousal level on watching other people having sex. And so back to the film, Jon then comes across Barbara, aka Scarlett Johansson, at the club. This is a different girl. You know, we have the short game and we have the long game, right? Jon is used to the short game. I see the girl at the club, I grab her, and I bring her back home. That night, short game. Barbara's a little different. She wants the long game. She's a romantic. And you notice this when they start dating. She's obsessed with movies about perfect love and perfection and romance. Don Jon is the complete opposite. But he knows in order to have sex with her, which is pretty much all he really cares about at first, and then he comes up with the idea that he's in love with her later, he realizes, and his friends realize, he has to play the long game. He has to take her out to lunch, coffee, and then she starts really setting these rules, this agenda for our man Don Jon. He's not really used to this at all. And so for her, she wants him to be a very specific, particular way. Like, you should go to school. You need to meet my family. I need to meet your family. You can't clean your apartment. You know, that's embarrassing that you clean your apartment. That's something that peasants do, you know. So she's on a high horse trying to change Don Jon. And I think it really set in with him when he actually has this argument in a store with Barbara. Now that they're together, he's in a relationship with her. They have this argument because he's going to go buy a mop or some specific, Swiffer cleaning device, whatever, to clean his apartment. And she's just like, no, you're not buying that with me in public. That's embarrassing. And so after the fight is done, you see it in his face. He's like, huh? Like, this is a weird thing to me. Like, how is this bothering you? This is who I am. I like cleaning my apartment. She doesn't even listen to him because all she cares about is her agenda. And so then it gets real spicy. Back to the porn. He sleeps with her for the first time, which was the main intention from the get-go. Like, damn, Scarlett Johansson, fine as hell. I want her. She's a dime, quote unquote. And he finally gets that. And he thinks to himself, like, oh, this must be as good as porn. Like, it has to be. She checks off all the boxes. But then as soon as he's done, he's laying in bed. He goes right back to his same routine as if he was sleeping with the short gamers. Goes right into the other room and starts to watch porn and then gets caught. She wakes up and catches him watching porn. Not with his pants down, but just watching it. So he tries to justify it. And she comes in and she just says, this is disgusting. Only losers watch porn. And then he says, no, it's a joke. Like, I'm not watching porn. I'm not that guy, even though he is. I'm not that guy. So he will suppress, reduce, and eliminate, who he really is to try and keep his so-called, quote unquote, love, Barbara. And so he makes a promise to her to never do it again. So what do you think? Do you think Don Jon does it again? Is he addicted? Well, let's see. As time goes on, I think the fight in the store over cleaning his apartment happens after this. They meet families and all this stuff, and then there's like a conversation at dinner where she talks about her friend and that friend's relationship, and you can tell that Don Jon is just really not interested. He's not interested in these romantic movies that she always watches, not really stimulated in the conversations. I think deep in his soul, he knows he's not being himself and he's not really happy in this relationship, right? And so, again, does Don Jon stop watching porn? Hell no. He goes right back to it after he promised he wouldn't. And then she catches him again. Number 2 is the most important. The second time that she catches him, it was because she was snooping in his laptop and he didn't know how to clear his history from his browser. And so this guy gets caught. She's like, you watched porn 46 times today, or 46 videos today alone. And so she's disgusted. And for the most part, his justification is when he gets caught this time that every guy watches porn. And if they say they don't, they are lying. So now the real Don Jon is coming out. Okay, I do watch porn. And you're crazy because every guy watches porn. Whoever says they don't, they are lying. And she is treating it like he is cheating on her. And I'm sure this is a thing that happens within marriages and relationships. I wouldn't be surprised. And I've actually, I had an ex who had a friend a long time ago who was dealing with this, where she caught him watching porn. And it was a very interesting dynamic, and people look at it from very different perspectives, and that's why it's so interesting. In her mind, she said, quote, you make love to the porn more than me. So she is just totally against it. She thinks that this guy is cheating on her, that he is just street rap, basically. Much like how, oh, you aren't cleaning your own apartment, only scumbags and dirtbags watch porn. And so she left with this quote, "I thought you were different, but you're not." Again, a really high standard, probably set by her fantasies and how she was brought up and all those romantic movies. She has like a certain standard, an unrealistic standard, but at the same time, it doesn't mean Don Jon can't fix his flaws, which the main one is being addicted to porn. So moving forward here, at the end of that, or when she was drilling him for this, Don Jon says, "I don't know what's wrong with me." So this is like a key sign, like he doesn't know why he's so addicted to porn. Okay, and this guy bent over backwards for this girl, right? He joined a class for her. Like she was just like, okay, you should go back to school, try to be something, And he did it for her. And it's in this class where he meets Julianne Moore, which we'll get into in a second. But he played the long game. He bit his tongue about cleaning his apartment. He said he wouldn't watch porn again. He watched all the movies that she loved, did everything that she wanted to do, meet the friends, meet the families, all that shit. He bent over backwards. And it was very one-sided. And so, in his mind, and there's a part where he says, "I watch porn. I'm not a junkie." And he makes the drug addiction comparison. And this is where the neurotransmitter dopamine comes into play. Dopamine is released, and it's in our central nervous system. It's in our nervous system in general. And it's that want. It gets released at high levels over novelty. Something that we want, something that's like new and enticing. And from, a prehistoric standpoint, it's I see something, I smell something that is going to lead me to berries. So it's a reward system, a natural circuitry. And it's not that it's good or bad or what have you. It's all about balance. And when you overdo it, it becomes detrimental and a problem for your health. And with porn, that's exactly what's going on. When you're watching porn, you are releasing dopamine. Very high levels prior. When he's opening the laptop, he mentions the sound when you turn on the computer. And he's like, "I love that sound. Like, that sound gets me going. It gets me hard as a fucking rock." And that is the dopamine, not the actual act of like orgasm and all that, but it's just the matter of like he's just not, he said he's breezing through the videos to find the right one before he even touches himself. That is the epitome of high dopamine levels, and it has its usage and its functionality. It's needed. People who don't have it have efficient amounts of dopamine or proper firing. That's where you get Parkinson's disease. And so it has its role, right? And when you overdo it, it's no different than a junkie. But in the film, he says, "I'm not a junkie." Denial. But it's just that. And so when you have these high levels of arousal, especially from watching two other people fuck, right? Okay, now I'm adapting to that. Like, that's what I want. How does that transfer over into real life, real sex with one person? And we'll get into that in a second. I know I keep mentioning that Julianne Moore stuff, but we'll get there. But for the most part, just keep in mind, when you have high levels of dopamine released all the fucking time, there's always a down. And it doesn't drop down to baseline. It goes below that. Okay? And so that's when it really becomes a problem over time. And so he goes to church and he's always in confession saying, "Father, I've jacked off 34 times this week." 34 times? Like, that's insane. And that's always accompanied by the porn, right? The release of dopamine. And so let's go to the classroom where he told Barbara his quote-unquote love. He was always seeing this woman, Julianne Moore, in there. Older woman, not his quote-unquote vision of a dime, right, from the clubs, all that. This is an older woman, very different, redhead, not your stereotypical Jersey, catch, right? And so she pokes in and out of his life in the classroom specifically, but once he's done with Barbara, he immediately goes and sleeps with her. And she just kind of keeps it real with him. And what I found fascinating was that she was actually speaking and trying to help and talk and kind of teach and give advice to this kid, Don John, the realities of porn. Like, hey, it's just acting, right? And how does that transfer over to me? And she mentions it. She says, when we have sex, you don't even really notice I'm there. And she's like, I'm okay with that because that's actually where I want to be right now, meaningless sex. But if you want to have a connection with someone, a real one, the porn is really going to dilute that. And she's absolutely right. And no one's ever kept it real like that. No girl, at least, has ever kept it real like that with Don John. And I think this is what really, attracts him to her. And then she mentions, do you ever jack off without porn? And he says no. And then he tried it for a week and he just couldn't do it. In his mind, it almost clicks. He's like, holy shit, maybe I am addicted to porn, And he makes a justification. I could stop if I wanted to, but could he? And it wasn't until she kind of enlightened him about this addiction that he just became much more attracted to her. Ran up to her the next time she saw her after they had sex, and then a week went by. He tried this experiment of jacking off without porn, and he just fucking went up to her like a lost puppy, and they didn't even go to class. They went back to her house, and it's in this house where he starts to feel real connection and has real sex with her. And she has a traumatic experience herself. Julianne Moore, her husband and son, 14 months prior to this meeting at her house, died in a car crash. Fucking traumatic. And the ability to, get lost in someone and make love and have real sex with someone, that's got to be really difficult for her. But, she's managing it with this guy, Don John. So they have a real connection, and he's really feeling it. And, he goes to church later on again, and he's bragging, I didn't jack off at all this week. And, I made love to one time with this woman, and it's different. And the Holy Father gives him the same prayers or whatever. And he decides then to meet with Barbara again. Now he's in this whole new mentality, right? He feels like he broke his addiction. He's singing in the car, feeling like a whole new person, right? Perfect sign of him just getting dopamine levels back to normal, probably. But at the same time, he's just understanding this girl, Barbara, never really loved him. She had an idea in her mind and wanted him, she wanted to mold him into what her idea of love is. And so this lunch meeting, after he's really gotten a connection with Julianne Moore, he has a lunch meeting with Barbara, aka Scarlett Johansson. And it was just further confirmation. He was just calling her out, aren't you being one-sided in all this? You were trying to turn me and change me into something that you wanted. And then she was just well, isn't that one-sided when you watch porn? And he was just absolutely. This is absolutely right. I acknowledge that. And in his mind, he's and I've broken that. I've changed. I don't watch porn anymore. It was one-sided. I have the ability to change myself and fix my flaws and admit when something is one-sided that I'm going to adjust. Not Scarlett Johansson. Very stubborn, and she basically ended the conversation she was on her high horse. She was right. Don John, you're just not ready for a real relationship. And she walks off and says, don't call me again. Was Don John heartbroken? Was he the same guy that was fascinated and literally the word we should describe here, obsessed with how she looked and just being able to get in bed with her? He wasn't the same guy. He let her go and he said, well, fuck, I don't really care. Went right back to Julianne Moore, and the movie ends with how much he describes Julianne Moore looking into his eyes, and he didn't care, and it was just real connection. And when they have sex, they're making love. They get lost. Nothing else matters. And it's nothing that he's ever experienced before, and it changed him as a man. And so I think for me, the moral of the story is, as I wrap this up, the true takeaway is when it comes to relationships, I've been on both sides where I've seen people completely alter who they really are to try to accommodate me, but I've also done the same So that's one takeaway when it comes to Barbara and Don John's relationship, to not buckle, especially if they're just so good looking and everything on paper seems to be right. You know, you have to kind of go with your gut and never, ever alter who you are to an extent, you know, because Don John was the guy that was watching porn. But then some epiphanies come around and he realizes, I want to change this. I want to make myself a better person and ditch this, right? And so to an extent, it's okay to chisel away and make a beautiful statue out of yourself, but you don't want to completely artificially alter who you really are for someone else. And then when it comes to the porn addiction, I had a buddy say that porn saves marriages, right? And I'm not entirely sure if that's true. I think that's just like his idea of it. Well, I watch porn in my spare time because all I have is one woman to sleep with for the rest of my life. Take that how you will. And I'm not here on a high horse saying that porn is bad, right? I mean, if you do too much of it, great, you know, that's going to be a problem. But for the most part, this is not me just, oh, all you guys are scumbags. Like, I've never watched porn before in my life. But it's just when it gets to a point where it's Don John, where you need it, where you're thinking about it more than you are being productive. I mentioned in other episodes, it's like, well, while you're doing, like he said, 34 times in 1 week, like that's a lot of time wasted where you can be reading something, educating yourself, just going for a walk, like doing some physical exercise, mental exercises. Like there's so many other things you can do in general to make you a better person in all sectors of life, rather than just sitting there beaten off to other people having sex, which is literally fake and artificial and quite frankly not fair, because you're going to carry this image or this way that you think you should have sex with a woman in person. It's not going to work out the way you want it to, buddy. But the reality is you can be doing something better and more productive than just obsessing over porn. And it's becoming drastically more disgusting. And it really is a poisonous industry when you really boil down to what it is and how it profits. And do you want to be a supporter of that? Do you want to be a victim of your own your own chemistry? Do you want to keep releasing your dopamine like crazy? I mean, I don't know. Theo Von said it best. He's masturbated probably 3,000 times in his life, and not one time did he get an award for it. There's really no reward system there once you do it. And that's what the dopamine is. It is our reward circuitry. And when you start draining that, it's like as soon as you're done, you have your orgasm. I swear, I'm disgusted by my phone. I close the screen so quickly, and I never feel truly fulfilled. But when you actually make love to a girl or a woman that you have a connection with, even after you orgasm, laying with them and continuously speaking with them, hanging out with them and doing it again, I think that's something that's way more valuable and something worth pursuing, as another principle to take away there. But overall, this is just thoughts. Please watch the movie and tell me what you think. Maybe do a bit more research on the science of dopamine and how it applies here with porn addiction, but then all other types of addictions as well. There's tons of content. Welcome to 2024. Hopefully I didn't put you to sleep. Watch the movie Don John. And please, again, like, share, subscribe, all that shit. And thank you for listening to the Travis Masterbone podcast. And I hope you can tune in next time. Farewell.